Thank you, Judith, and thank you for inviting me here today. It's lovely to see you all, and feels very appropriate to be in the room, because when I started writing my works on oral histories and local history, I wasn't in those days a senior. Now, of course, I well and truly am, so I feel I've arrived, which is great. The best time of one's life, I reckon. Now, I'm in the business of storytelling, obviously, and storytelling has to be in our DNA, because humankind have been telling stories from time immemorial, stories that explain ourselves and that explain the world around us. And in my opinion, theatre has to be the most visceral and immediate way of storytelling. And I've been in love with stories since I was a small child, and in love with the theatre since I was a small child, when my parents in London used to take me to the theatre from the age of 4 or 5. And I knew instantly that's what I wanted to do. That's all my life, ever since that moment. I was intent on telling stories through theatre. So here we are. And over the years, I'm going to start, first of all, by the way, with talking about a show that's very current at this moment in our lives, Bernie, my husband, and I, our lives, because it's Sydney 2, Lost and Found, a story about HMAS Sydney, which goes out on tour again, the third time on Monday, and so we just come straight from rehearsals of that. So I would like to start talking about that story and then move on to other parts of my theatre life. And it's because, as I was saying to a group the other day, that on Thursday, that there are so many stories you can make out of anything, really. Over my long career of writing for the theatre, writing oral histories for the theatre, you can make a really good story out of the smallest incident. But sometimes stories come along that are so huge and so important, these really must be told. And this particular story started its journey with me back in 2017, when Bernie and I went to the Maritime Museum to see a presentation about HMAS Sydney 2 and the sinking and the finding the finding of the wreck in 2008. And the presentation was given by Ted Graham, AM, who's the chair and founder of the Finding Sydney organisation. Finding Sydney Foundation, actually it was called, the FSF. And they raised $5 million, just a little ordinary group of people who weren't connected to government they didn't even have a charity. They started this small foundation because Ted had this wonderful idea that if we didn't find the wreck within his generation, he's the same age as me, well, he's a couple of years older, he's 76, if we didn't find it in this generation, the interest would dissipate and it would never be found. And there'd be all these family members who are still waiting after 66 years at that point to find out where their loved ones were. Because the ship had gone down off the West Australian coast in 1941, in battle with HSK Cormoran, which was a German raider that was going up our coastline. Both ships went down. The Sydney was lost with all hands. 645 men went down on that fateful night in about half an hour battle. And it was a huge blow to the nation, a huge moral blow at that point in the war when the war wasn't going too well. So it was an extraordinarily important national incident. But all these years later, of course, things dissipate over the period of time, over the course of time, and he felt it was really important to find it this moment. And he was successful, and it was a huge operation, and it was a race against time, race against running out of money before they found the ship, or before, as I say, all the remaining widows and family members were lost to us as well. So Benny and I went to see this presentation, and it was really fascinating, and there was wonderful video of the underwater wreck. And the last image, or one of the last images on the video, was of an empty boot with a bullet hole in it, an empty boot lying on the ocean floor. And it was the only iconic, the sole iconic image of all the people that had died, because bodies don't last in the water after a period of time. And there was no remains. There's a wreck was there, but no remains of the men that went down, except for this one boot, which was so haunting. And I clutched Bernie and I said, there's a play in here somewhere, a play about the finding as well as the sinking. So how do we go out and do this? And the idea lived with me for some time, for a few years actually, because we had other plays to write. But coming up to 2021, which was the 80th anniversary of the sinking, and was going to be a lot of commemoration events, particularly at Geraldton, where the wonderful, I don't know if you know it, but the wonderful monument with all the seagulls, for beautiful 645 seagulls representing the seamen's lives, which was another inspiration for us, as it has to be told now. So we were on a race, this was in 2020, and we were on a race against time to raise the funds ourselves and to get all the show ready and get it written, get the cast, get all the marvellous screen presentation we wanted, and book the tour and all that kind of thing. So we were in our own race against time. It was all very exciting, as creating a show always is. And at the time, we just launched our first production. When I say our, I'm talking about Theatre 180, and I'll come to how Theatre 180 started in a moment. But it was our first production at the time of our new concept, which we called Cine Stage, which is theatre performed in cinemas. And this came about quite coincidentally, really, because we wanted to do a production of A Fortunate Life, the wonderful biography by A.B. Facey. And it's such an iconic Australian book. It's sold something like 100,000 copies around the world. It's an amazingly successful book, put Fremantle Press on the map. And everybody who reads it loves it, because it's a story full of hope and courage and resilience. It speaks to everybody across generations. And it's the story of a man, 80 years of a man's life, really. We wanted to put that on stage, which is quite a big ask. You know, if it's different if you're doing a 8-part television series, but how do you put a person's life on stage in an hour and a half? And so we were thinking of ways to do it. And because we were having trouble, as always, raising the funding, getting money together for theatre is always a tricky one. And we hit on the idea of not using the theatre. Theatres around Perth are at a premium and very expensive to hire, but of using a place where people are really used to going and love going, a cinema. And Ron Semeniowski, who is a Albany-born, entrepreneur, businessman, who owns the Arana cinemas that you see around the region, he was very open to the idea of us utilising the cinema for theatre, because we just come out of COVID. Theatres were at a very low cinemas were at a very low ebb, well, so were theatres, but cinemas were losing their audiences left, right and centre, and he was really happy to activate his venues. So we started off in his cinemas, and now we've progressed and we're even going to event cinemas soon. But we started off with the wonderful inspiration of Ron. And we invented a way of having a stage that can be changed in height, so it can, the top of the stage can be at the bottom of the screen no matter what cinema you're in, so that we can tour all over the country and use the whole cinema screen as the backdrop with film on it for set. So we can travel very light with the costumes and suitcase of props and apart from the projector and the technical equipment that we need, we can travel very light around the stage. And we now even have a giant screen that folds up into a box, and all our own projecting equipment, so that we can even perform in town halls. And we do. We perform in the teeniest towns around WA that would normally never see theatre. So it's been a fantastic boon to us, and we think to audiences, because we have met so many people who've never even been to a theatre and wouldn't even consider it, but love to go to the cinema, and they've really enjoyed seeing their first time ever live performance in that way. This was Fortunate Life was our first production, which is still going, just done its, I think, 4th tour, and it's going off to Queensland soon to do another one. That's done well over, I think, 130 performances now, which is marvellous again, because normally we get to do theatre for 2 or 3 weeks and that's it. We never get to see it again. So this is a way of all that effort and money and expertise and passion that goes into a project. It means that we can continue it for many years and give a lot of artists and technical people a lot of work. So it's working out extremely well for us on all fronts. So with A Fortunate Life doing so well, the next show, I said to the board and to the artistic director, the next show has to be Sydney 2, because what this concept needs is epic stories. When you've got a huge screen that fills a cinema, you want to tell a big story that means a lot to a lot of people and encompasses humour, pathos, adventure, excitement. And this particular show about Sydney 2, with a battle and everything else, was a big thing to try and put on stage. But with a screen to aid us, it was absolutely ideal. Now, we only had 3 actors on stage in these productions. We have a number of constraints. And some people say to me, how do you write a play? How difficult it must be when you've got so many constraints. You can only do X, Y, and Z. In fact, it's the opposite is true. Having some kind of limitations or apparent limitations makes you be more innovative, makes you find ways of dealing with things that you wouldn't have otherwise thought of, and makes it really more interesting in the end. And I love working with a certain parameters. I think if I had the whole world to deal with, I'm not sure I'd know where to start. But if I got certain parameters that contain me, I can be really innovative within that format. So we only have 3 actors because the stage is long and narrow in front of the screen, and also the screen is like the 4th actor, and that's obviously very dominant. So it doesn't really suit us to put a cast of 20 in front of it, even if we could afford to. So we have 3 actors, and they are storytellers. They literally are, at the top of every play, they are telling a story. And in doing so, they then morph suddenly into various different characters. I think in A Fortunate Life, the actors play 80 characters between them, including animals. So it has to be very physical and immediate, fast-moving theatre. And they never go off stage because there's no wings, not like a theatre. So any costumes and bits and pieces they need are on stage, and they change as they go, as they're talking. And it's really a fascinating way of doing theatre, and actually it's born out of the kind of shows we had been doing for years before that in my company, Agelink Theatre, which morphed into Theatre 180. But I'm going to go back to that in a minute, so I'm very good at sidetracking. I have to keep myself on track. So Sydney 2 Lost and Found is about to go out on tour on Monday around the WA again, and then it will be in Perth in August, 11th, 12th, 13th. It'll be at the Windsor Cinema in Nedlands if you're interested in seeing that one. It's very exciting, but of course one of the things is how do you put a battle on stage? Well, when you've got the screen, of course, you've got the amazing advantage of having the actors as the German on the German ship or on HMS Sydney on stage with everything going on behind them and all the relevant sound effects and everything else. You can do so much that I wouldn't have been able to do if it had been a regular stage play. Also in this particular show, although we have the 3 actors, only one of them happens to be a female, because we needed a lot of men, of course, being a a movie about the Navy. So only one of the actors is female. And I really wanted there to be two very important female roles in this play. And the reason is that when we went to see the presentation at the Maritime Museum, and I spoke to Ted afterwards, and I said to him, I think this would make a really wonderful play. And surprisingly, he was very receptive and said, oh yes, all right, well, come and talk to me about it. And I warned him, I said, Ted, you will actually be a character in the play, so you might want to think twice. He was very brave and said, all right, I'll go with that. Now, Ted is 6'4", so luckily for us, we had Miles Pollard. I don't know if the actor Miles Pollard, who's got a good, very well-known screen presence. In fact, one of his films is premiering tonight at the Luna, Leaderville, and he's 6'4", luckily. So I said, it's all right, can cast you, that's okay. But standing next to him after his presentation was a lady called Ellen Underwood and her husband, Roger. And I was introduced to Ellen and immediately saw a way forward with the production because she was the youngest, or still is, the youngest surviving child of any of the Sydney crew. Her mother, Jessie, married young Alan Rowe, and a few weeks later he was drafted onto the Sydney when she docked in Fremantle before her last voyage. Before that, he'd been on a minesweeper going up and down the coast, and he was sent onto the Sydney. He was thrilled because the Sydney was the darling of the fleet and a world-famous ship, and everybody thought she was unsinkable. She was massive, she was modern, she was beautiful, and the boys who'd been sailing with her were all heroes because they'd just come back from sinking the Bartolomeo in... Thank you, yes, thank you. Corleone. My Italian isn't good and it went. In Europe, and so they were such heroes, those boys, and he thought, I'm going to be one of the heroes, isn't this fantastic? So his young wife was nervous about it, and said, you're going to be, at least I knew where you were before, now I don't know where you're going to go. And when he went on board, the day he went on board, she told him that she thought she was pregnant. And 2 weeks later, he went down with the ship. So there was this wonderful love story, a tragic love story, but a love story to base the play on, because you can't really tell a story about 645 people without it being more like a documentary in a very, rather a documentary style. So you really have to focus on people. And this young couple, for me, represented the lives of all those young men on board. So luckily for me, Ellen had written a book about her mother, because her mother had documented lots of her own memories about her life. So I did have some provenance to work on for this young couple. And they became the centre of the story of the sinking. But then, of course, there's also the finding of the that was another story to weave into the two strands to the story to weave together. That in itself was a big challenge, was a very difficult play to write. That in 2008 story, the one in 1941, and weaving them together and keeping the suspense of both going. But took a lot of rewrites, but it was a fantastic journey to go on. But the thing about Ellen is that I really wanted to put in the play Jessie she's a young woman on stage in the middle of her engagement and marriage and all the rest of it. But I also wanted to have on the stage the character of Ellen, Jessie's daughter, as an old lady, because I don't know why, because actually I just really like the idea. But what it does for me is that it emphasises the legacy of the story down through generations. So I couldn't really have the actress Sienna playing both her mother and herself at the same time. So what we did was we hit on the idea of filming the character, the actor who plays Ellen, and putting her on the screen, and then Sienna, who plays Jessie, as a woman is on stage, and they interact that way. It's really quite magical. But of course, there was a lot of technical stuff. Peter would know all about this, putting somebody who's massive on the screen and then somebody who looks very small next to it on the stage. It was really very interesting concept, an interesting exercise, but it really does work for me. There's something very magical about seeing this character talking to us and also to this person on stage, and then having a conversation with the reel and the screen presentation. It's just fabulous. I'm hoping that we're going to do more with characters interacting on screen and on stage. And it's just such beautiful things that happen and have always happened with the work we've done creating stories out of local shows. There's a beautiful synthesis and serendipity when people just come together. It's very life-affirming and heartwarming. Now, Theatre 180 started out of Age-Length Theatre, which I founded in 1993. And I founded it because I've been back when my father died in England. And I was always going to write down my father's stories. He was a child in World War I. He was in the RAF in World War II, but he was a child in London in World War I. And his stories of London then were almost Dickensian in nature to me. It was fabulous, such a far-off world and so interesting, peopled with amazing characters. And I was always going to write his memories down. And by the time I got round to it, it was too late. He wasn't able to just converse anymore. And I really kicked myself for that. I thought, this is a wasted opportunity to celebrate my dad, but also because I realised I was interested in oral histories, to know something about this time that I didn't know already. So when I came back to Perth, I decided this is what I wanted to do, was to focus on oral histories. I was very aware of my dad. He was in a nursing home in his last days, how isolated and depressed a lot of people were around him. This is back in England in 93, not recent times. And my dad always said, well, towards the end, I'm no use to anybody anymore. What am I doing here? And I wanted to say to all seniors, of which I am now one, we have a use, we have a legacy, we have stories to tell that are really important. And the motto from the beginning with Age-Link Theatre is that we bring generations together, and that we need to look at the past and remember the past in order to inform the present and plan for the future, because otherwise, what do we learn? So everybody's story really is important. And so over 30 years, we've been doing lots and lots and lots of interviews with seniors and created lots of shows based on seniors' memories. It's always a joy, but it's a huge responsibility, of course, because you are telling someone's story. You have to get it right as much as you can, allowing the fact that for memory, all our memories anyway, sometimes are a bit creative. But particularly with a show like Sydney 2, there's the Navy involved, and the RAN are not going to be keen if I get any of those facts wrong. So there's a big responsibility to all sorts of people to get things accurate, sensitive, but also to be able to imagine, because all the conversations, all the thoughts, all the emotions that go into a play obviously really come out of my imagination. So the more I talk to people, the more I read around a subject, the more informed I am. But I have to know as much as I can about the original people, talk to their families, get their permission, feel that I have the license, really, to go ahead and explain them to the world. And I always have to say to everybody, of course, that we will treat all your stories with immense respect. We're here because we want to promote all the best in everybody, so that we're here to talk about resilience and hope and courage and all those things that we want to pass on to future generations. So we want our shows to be inspiring. And it doesn't mean to say that everybody has to be perfect in them. Sorry about that. Popping like that. I used to get told off at the ABC for my P I pop too much, so I'll have to do peas that way. Perfect. Yes, that's better. So not everybody, sorry, 2 minutes. Oh my goodness me. Shocking. Okay, only 2 minutes. So I have to be very careful that we keep everybody in tune with what we're doing, and we actually celebrate them. And so all the stories we choose for Theatre 180, first of all, Age Link Theatre and now Theatre 180, have always got to be West Australian stories, very inspiring, and talking about all those qualities that we really want future generations to have, and past generations have had to show in different circumstances. And who knows what difficult circumstances may be ahead. We really need things like resilience and hope and courage. So I feel now that my dad, I'm vindicated. I hope my dad's looking down somewhere and enjoying. He was the man who particularly loved stories. He'd tell us stories when we were children, at bedtime and that kind of thing. And he was a great story lover. So I know actually that he would love what we do because he loves going to the theatre. And do look out for Theatre 180. Peter and Jan have been involved a lot over the past few years, in filming a lot of the work that we've done out at Endersley, those history shows about Sarah of Endersley Farm, the Morley family, Georgiana Malloy, May Gibbs. There are so many stories in WA to tell, and I think we're pretty untapped compared to the rest of the nation. So look out, the rest of the nation, here we come. It's our journey now to go out and tell everybody else in the world how wonderful WA is and the amazing stories that we have. And I am rounding up. But since the millennium, I've felt really keenly how the zeitgeist has changed. When we started in 93, I always felt as seniors were a bit sidelined. It's a youth culture. History, we're not really interested in history. We're looking forward. But come the millennium, and suddenly we have a history. Look back and we've got, a couple of 100 years almost of history. Then suddenly the mood's changed and people are much more interested in our past and our history. So now is our time, guys. Now is our time to record our stories. I'm going to do my own one day. I hope you all are as well, because I reckon our grandchildren really don't know as much as we think they do. So, please record your stories and come along and see our shows. And if you've got any ideas for shows, let us know. Thanks very much for having me today.